Good Friday afternoon, everyone. It is so good to see and hear you all here. My name is Allison Anderson, and I am so excited that you have joined our third Cultivating Healthy Minds, Resilience in Agriculture. This is going to be an incredible Zoom where you're going to learn so much, and I'm just so thankful that you're here. My husband, Jared, and I are the Young Farmers and Ranchers State Chair for 2023, and we have partnered with the Women's Committee, the Oklahoma Women's Leadership Committee, to bring you Cultivating Healthy Minds. And it has been a labor of love. And we're just so thankful that all of our incredible speakers and testimonial speakers have came together to really share the love of agriculture and share some mental health tips and tricks and just anything that can help agriculturalists along the way in Oklahoma and beyond. And so we're just super excited that you're here. I am going to now introduce to you Miss Karen Dodson, and I will tell you that she is probably one of my favorite people in the world, as well as Dr. Ferrell, who you will hear from later. But Karen's going to give us a little bit of a testimonial to how important mental health is to her and why it's important to really discuss. So Karen, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Allison. I'm excited to get to share with you, and I'm excited to hear Dr. Ferrell speak later. So I'm not going to take very long, but I want to, share. I did not grow up in an ag family. My dad was a Baptist preacher. And so we lived not paycheck to paycheck, but we had a consistent expected paycheck. And when I married into the farming community, it can be overwhelming. The debt load, the return on investment's not quite as good as when you're just doing labor and getting a paycheck. And those things kind of it's overwhelming. So if you've brought somebody into the ag world, make sure to check on them. Because some of those things are challenging. It's a different mindset. It's also not just one person's career. The whole family tends to go in and do the work. And that's different than what I had grown up with. I also moved to my husband's hometown or country. We live out in the country. But you lose track of my friends. I lost track of, and I became enveloped in his world. And so there's a little bit of isolation that happens there. And I think could be a risk for some mental health issue. As we decided to start a family, we just decided, and we had Brittany. Some of y'all know Brittany. And then as soon as we were ready to have another child, we went through probably a 3-year period of extreme highs and lows with fertility treatment. Had all of our children lived, we would have had 6. So out of 6 pregnancies, we brought one baby girl home. And that is the hormones are the highest high and the lowest low. When you think you're pregnant and then you realize you're not. And it just is, it's a definite point for some mental health problems. At that point, luckily I had her dad to help walk that with me and to go through that with me. And neither one of us felt like we were alone. I'll kind of fast forward about 20 years, and then everything seems to be going fine. We're the farm family. My in-laws had retired, basically on paper, at least. And then my husband was diagnosed with brain cancer. So immediately, my father-in-law kind of stepped back in and helped me. But that's a real risk there for mental issues of being isolated. No longer was he able. I mean, he was there. He's still coherent and could talk and carry on conversations even up until just a few days before he passed. So that was a 2-year battle with brain cancer that we went through with him. I one specific time he was in the hospital in Oklahoma City, and I had come home just to shower, and then I was going to go back to Oklahoma City and stay with him one Christmas he was in the hospital 24 days, and the next Christmas 42 days. And so I had come home to shower, and this feeling came over me of I'm going to be absolutely alone. And as quick as that came over me that I was going to be alone, there was this reassurance that I was not alone because of my faith, because of having the Holy Spirit to guide me and to walk through things with me. I was not alone. And I have said multiple times, don't try this without God in your life, without a faith and that there's more to an existence than just earth and just your life here. Then after he passed and my daughter graduated a few years later and went to college, I went through a struggle of who am I? I had been Jeff's wife. I had been Brittany's mom. And then now who am I? And I found my strength in actually the book of Romans and just transpose that for myself of who does Christ say I am? Who does God say I am? Who was I created to be? And my encouragement, I guess, to everybody that might be watching is your identity is not in how many bushels an acre you raise. It's not in the children you raise and their decisions, good or bad. It's not in your spouse. Your identity is because God created you with a purpose and intentional. You're unique. And that's where I have found my strength. I think that's where I found what today's session is going to call resilience. There were days that if I didn't have to get up and fix my daughter breakfast, I'd have probably stayed in bed and pulled the covers up and just not gotten out of bed. But God placed, had that one miracle child that was the strength that I needed to get out of bed on some days. I will cut it there. I'm ready to hear Dr. Ferrell, but if you're not okay, talk to somebody and talk those things through.
Karen, I am just going to tell you that I think you being in this testimony and Dr. Ferrell speaking today, both of you just exude resilience, and you have touched my heart as well as thousands across the state of Oklahoma and beyond. And I'm just so thankful you are who you are, and you shared that incredible story of strength, because you, my dear, are strength and you are resilient. So thank you so much. I'm going to get teary again. I got to stop doing that when I MC these things, Dr. Ferrell. Dr. Ferrell is also one of the most resilient folks that I know, and I'm just thankful that he is joining us today. Dr. Ferrell is a professor of agriculture economics at Oklahoma State University, where he specializes in agricultural law. As an educator and speaker, he has helped audiences across North America understand the fundamentals of legal elements and farm business management and farm transition. And he has testified before Congress and the Oklahoma legislature on multiple policy issues involved in farm transition, regulatory barriers, and the transition process to retirement savings and for farmers and ranchers. Dr. Ferrell's work in transition planning has shown him the importance of mental well-being of farm families. Dr. Ferrell, we are so thankful for you. We're so thankful that you're here. Take it away.
Allison, thank you so much. Everyone, thank you for attending today. It's so good to be sharing this with you. And I want to especially thank Karen. Now, I did not show Karen my slide set, but just so you know, she basically went through everything I'm about to tell you today and checked every box. So, I mean, Karen, thank you so much for sharing that. And I really want to emphasize that just having the conversation and just sharing our struggles of what we have gone through is so important in agriculture for two reasons. Number one, in agriculture, as we're going to talk about here in just a minute, we're still kind of catching up in terms of embracing the fact that we've got mental health issues and we need to be confronting them. But two, it's just to let you know that you're not alone. I mean, every one of us has faced some form of struggle one way or another, and there's different magnitudes, but your struggle is your struggle. One of the things that I learned that really just hit me straight in the chest when I started working in the mental health space was a veteran from Canada who had said, look, people drown in bathtubs, people drown in lakes, and people drown in the ocean. It's not a matter of what it was that set you down your course. It's the fact that you encountered that challenge and had to face it. So just having this conversation is tremendous. So what we're going to do today is kind of give you a quick flyover of a lot of the issues that we uniquely face in agriculture, and then hopefully equip you with the tools to notice those issues and lend help to your fellow farmers and ranchers. But every bit as important is to help us take care of you as well. And Karen did a fantastic job sharing her story. I'll make mine very condensed. I've dealt in my life with clinical depression and anxiety. And I found out very recently that there was a multi-generational history of that. And so learning that really informed how I approached my healing process when it came to my depression issues. And I hope that this seminar informs that for you as well. So with that, I'm going to start sharing my slide deck here. That's a tongue twister there, right? So what I want to walk you guys through is, first off, just kind of some basic statistics about how we're doing in mental health in ag and especially in Oklahoma. And then, like I said, we're going to get into some more of the topics about what are some of the specific issues that we face and how can you face them? How can you help others face those as well? So Oklahoma's not doing great. I'll be perfectly honest with you guys. When it comes to mental health issues, we are the bottom of the barrel. Third nationally in all forms of mental illnesses that we face by all of our citizens. Second nationally in terms of serious mental illness. And when we talk about serious mental illness, that definition means a mental illness that has reached the level of severity that it has materially impacted your ability to perform your work tasks professionally, or has it impacted your relationships with your close family members. Then we have second nationally in terms of our rate of substance abuse disorders, and especially we've been very hard hit by the opioid epidemic, but also several other substance use issues as well. The one that really breaks my heart, and guys, I work in ag economics, okay? I've only ever read one statistic that literally brought a tear to my eye, and that was the fact that Oklahoma is #1 nationally in terms of adverse childhood experiences. We call those ACEs, ACEs. And that is witnessing domestic abuse, being the subject of domestic abuse, being in a situation of, really tumultuous divorce, or having to witness a parent be incarcerated, any of those very serious, but also life-shaping experiences that kids have. Our rates are on the rise for all of these issues in our adolescence. And if you to add it all up, our overall mental health ranking as a state is 49th. So it is kind of rough here in Oklahoma. If you look at the broader scope of things, 1 in 5 U.S. adults has experienced a mental health issue at some point in their life. There are about 30 of us on this webinar, which means there's probably about 6 of us that have really had to go through some sort of pretty serious mental health concern. 1 in 20 adults. So think about your Sunday school class. If you came from a small school, just your homeroom class, 1 in 20 adults have experienced a serious mental health issue. 1 in 6 U.S. kids has experienced a mental health disorder. And I want you to note, by the way, the data, that statistic, that was measured as of 2016. Now imagine, as we've gone through the pandemic, what that number looks like. Every expert I talk to says that number is going to skyrocket in the near future. And then 1 in 15 adults has experienced, this sounds a little technical, so hang with me, a co-occurring substance use disorder coupled with mental illness. That's a lot of multi-syllable words. But what we're saying there is that 1 in 15 adults has had anxiety, depression, some other mental health concern at the same time they've been dealing with a substance addiction. And honestly, there was probably a causality relationship there. It was probably the mental health disorder that led to the substance abuse disorder. Now, the next statistic that I have for you is maybe one of the most sobering that we've got, and that is our suicide rate. In other words, this is a per capita suicide rate. Oklahoma ranks 6th in the country. And I want you to notice something about every other state that you see listed above us there. Every one of those states is predominantly rural and agriculturally focused, with the exception of perhaps Arkansas, where Alaska, which maybe doesn't have as much active agriculture, but is a very rural state. The rural suicide rate exceeded the urban suicide rate starting in 2009, and the gap between those two rates has been rising ever since then. So that's borne itself out in the Oklahoma statistics. Our suicide rate has increased since 2020. Rural areas have seen over a 27% increase. I mean, that's just, it's just sobering. We've seen serious increases in our rates of depression and anxiety disorders. Same thing, increases with our substance abuse disorders. And telehealth has actually helped. And this is one of the positive things that came out of the pandemic. We learned that there were a lot of things we could do via telehealth that we didn't know we could do. And one of those has been accessing mental health services, because you guys know this all too well. Rural Oklahoma suffers from a serious dearth of access to mental health services and mental health professionals. As a matter of fact, I'm not going to kid you with this next thing I'm going to share. I ask our rural development specialists, hey, can you create a GIS map that shows the mental health care deserts in the state of Oklahoma? And a mental health care desert is defined as either there is no mental health professional accessible to you within your county, or you are 50 miles or more from having enough mental health professionals to meet the level of demand for your county. And they said, Ferrell, if we did that for you, it would just be a map of Oklahoma, because literally every county in the state qualifies as a mental health care desert, including Oklahoma and Tulsa counties, by the way. So telehealth is hopefully one of the tools that we can use to improve access to those mental health resources. But right now we are struggling with it. And I want to show you this quote as we kind of start talking about some things that are very specific to agriculture. We saw this in the late 20-teens, where we really were kind of seeing what some people were calling a second farm crisis, not quite of the depth that we saw in the early 1980s, but it was getting pretty bad. And that's actually one of the reasons why I started moving into the mental health space. But you see this quote: the farm crisis was so bad, there was a terrible outbreak of suicide and depression, said Jennifer Fahey, communication director with Farm Aid, a group founded in 1985 that advocates for farmers. Today, she said, I think it's actually worse. That quote is dated 2018. Now think about what has happened to us since the pandemic, and you start to realize this is really an epidemic. I know people try to make a crisis out of everything these days, because only if it's a crisis will you click on the link or give the attention to that issue. But I'm here to tell you, as a researcher with access to a lot of empirical data, we have a rural mental health crisis, and it's worsening. It's not getting better. But I am tremendously encouraged that we have groups like Farm Bureau and a lot of our other industry groups that are recognizing that, and they're really leaning into it. They're putting their weight and legitimacy behind that and opening up that conversation, and that's absolutely huge. And I think that's really important, because we face just different risks in agriculture. And I'm going to give you an example of this. I call this risk in agriculture and Class B athletics. I'm going to compare the Mulhall Orlando baseball team to a factory in Detroit. You're probably wondering where I'm going with this analogy. Let's talk about the factory in Detroit for a second. The factory in Detroit takes in raw materials, components, it's got a workforce, it's got infrastructure, and if they do everything right, they put these raw materials in the back end of the factory, and out comes a car. Now, they might face labor shortages, they might face changes in input costs, they might face changes in the market for their product, but if they do everything right, they know they can make cars. Now let's talk about the Mulhall Orlando Panthers baseball team. This year, this fall, for the first time in our school history, our baseball team went to the state tournament. Now, in the first game of the state tournament, we got run ruled 10-zip, but we went to the state tournament. But that's the first time it had happened in our history. And it's not because our kids don't work hard. It's not because we don't have great coaches. It's not because we don't have great community support. We've had all those things for a long time, but you just don't have amazing athletes maybe coming through your Class B baseball program all the time. And the reason I'm telling you this in the context of rural mental health is it's the same thing in farming. You can do everything absolutely right, but you're subject to all the other risks that all the other industries face. And layered on top of that, even if you do everything right, you don't know that you get product. You might not get the calf crop. You might not get the grain crop or whatever it is that you're raising, even if you do everything right. And that's stressful. And the accumulation of that stress is the root of a lot of our concerns. Farm stress is just different, okay? And beyond being stressful, farming is dangerous. When it comes to literally the mortality and morbidity rate in agriculture, we're the second most dangerous industry in the United States, second only to mining. So it's just dangerous, and danger begets stress on top of all the other stresses that we have. But like we've talked about too, we just have a lack of control. I mean, there are some things that we can't control, like the weather, like pest invasions, like market conditions and the macro economy. We do face all those dangers. As Karen mentioned, our rates of return are pretty low compared to other ways to earn a living. And so as a result of that, we have a lot more financial stress as well. And we face a risk that not a lot of other people do, in that we're also small business owners, but our small business is built around our home. So, losing our small business can be truly catastrophic for us. Now, layer over all of that the COVID-19 pandemic, and whatever your opinions might be about the pandemic, it was necessary to preserve the health of the people around us for us to be more isolated for a while. Lots of us lost a lot of people, maybe a lot of people close to us, maybe a lot of people in our community. I know my small town of Leedy, Oklahoma, population 345, lost 11 people. Well, that's a lot of people, period, but that's a lot of people proportionately for our small community. So we had lots of stressful events while we were also being isolated from the things that usually were our source of community and support. So any mental health issues that we had going into the pandemic were magnified, and lots of us, including myself, developed mental health issues during the pandemic as well, because the pandemic drove a lot of isolation. And as we're about to see here in just a little bit, isolation is a key driver of a lot of mental health issues. And part of that for rural America is that we're just more spread out. We're doing our job as farmers and ranchers isolated from other people. It may just be us, or it may just be us and our family members out there, but there's just fewer opportunities for us to connect with others. That's just kind of a natural function of our job. But also, we tend to be older in our rural communities, which can also be a problem with dealing with aging issues and role changes. We just have higher levels of long-term healthcare problems because of a lack of access to immediate medical care in our region. And the hospitals that we have are already kind of overworked, right? We don't have a lot of capacity to take on other issues as well. So we just kind of lack access to the resources generally for us to bounce back from those mental health issues. But in the end, I think the great paradox that we face in rural mental health is that I think that some of the things that are our greatest strengths might also be the sources of our greatest vulnerabilities. And let's explore that for just a little bit. First off, to be a farmer or rancher, you have to be fiercely independent, right? I've got to be an animal scientist, an agronomist. I've got to be an ag engineer, an ag economist, an accountant. The list goes on and on, because there's A, nobody else around. B, even if there was, I probably couldn't afford them. So C, I've got to do stuff on my own, which makes us generally pretty tough. But the flip side of that is that we just tend to isolate ourselves. We can be isolated physically, we can be isolated socially, and we can be isolated emotionally. And the cure for lots of mental health ills is connection, community, sharing. So we're kind of actually working against our interest if we just stay insular there. At the same time, like we talked about, all of the risk factors that we face in agriculture, you got to be kind of tough to deal with all of that. But you're also a human being. And I kind of grew up thinking I was raised by Vulcans. If you're a fan of Star Trek, the Vulcan culture was built all around, repressing emotions. Well, what I figured out sort of the hard way as an adult is that everyone's got emotions. It's just a question of how you express them. Well, kind of at the same token here, you don't have an endless ability to absorb trauma. If you've gone through a lot of hard stuff, you need to share that. You need to get it out. Don't just bottle it up. You need support to help you process that trauma so it doesn't just keep accumulating on you. How many of you have been told by somebody on your farm or ranch, suck it up, buttercup? And I know, by the way, I've used this phrase multiple times on my kid. But at some point, you also have to actually talk about how to actually process feelings. Like, what does it mean to be tough anyway, right? What does it take to be resilient? So maybe just saying, hey, suck it up, buttercup, don't be a baby, may not be the best way to approach how you process that. For lots of us, we're on multi-generational farms. I mean, in Oklahoma, I know several farmers and ranchers that are farming ground that was settled during a land run, and their family has been there ever since. And you can view that as a source of strength, right? Hey, I'm not doing this by myself. I've got the legacy of multiple generations of my family behind me to support me in this. And that's a positive thing. But by the same token, man, does that add a lot of stress, right? What if I'm the one that sends the farm to foreclosure? I've squandered everything that the past generations have done. And I sure understand how you get to that viewpoint, but do you think those previous generations never had any struggles? Do you think everything was just rosy and smooth sailing for them? I mean, I think that's one of the critical reasons we really need to get better about sharing our experiences in agriculture, is because we deny the people around us the benefit of knowing, hey, there are struggles for everybody. It's never easy. We made it through and you can make it through, but we're here to share that experience with you. I think that's huge for us. You know, we've got tremendous strength in our communities. And I will say, like, I put this on the slide, tremendous sacrificial support. If someone suffers a disaster in their family, man, do rural communities rally around them? I know when I lost my brother in a farm accident, our family felt that. But the thing about it is, that's great when the trauma is visual. It was a death in the family. It was a fire. It was a flood, a tornado, whatever the case. When that's visible, right? The community just rallies around that person. When it's a mental health issue, we just kind of all step back and go, oh, hey, I know Ferrell's going through some stuff. I want to just leave him alone. I don't want to, bother them or anything like that. And when we do that, what we're doing is we're actually further isolating the person. And it's like we're throwing gasoline on the fire. Just because we're uncomfortable, we don't know how to help. So that's one of the reasons we really need to talk about what we're talking about today. Is I don't want you to feel uncomfortable helping, or at the very least, I want you to proceed with helping, even in the face of being uncomfortable with it. So we're going to talk about how we can combat all these things. And what we're really talking about with respect to all of this is stress overload, this is actually a technical term in psychology and psychiatry that talks about how the human psyche processes hard stuff. And it's really just stress overload. If we have too much stress for too long of a time and don't find a way to positively process that stress, it starts to accumulate, build up, and what could have been a small problem starts to grow and grow and grow. But really how this progresses is that you have a stressor that you're not capable of responding to effectively at too high of a level for too long of a period of time. Having that stressor continuously without a break, without giving yourself a chance to reset, starts to cause different kinds of hardship in your life. Maybe it's harder for you to do your job. Maybe it's harder for you to have time to connect with your spouse or your kids. Maybe it's a financial issue. As those relationships start to strain, that starts to turn into what we call role confusion. I'm supposed to be the provider and protector for my household, but because of what I'm going through, I don't feel like I can do that. I'm supposed to be the caregiver in my household, but I'm having a hard time processing stuff. And if I'm doing that, how can I care for others? It's kind of that role dysphoria where we're not sure who we are anymore. And Karen, actually explicitly mentioned that in her testimony there. And then when we do that, then we have to create a shift in our expectations, maybe for others, but maybe for ourselves, right? What if I can't live up to my self expectations? I don't, that starts to erode my self-esteem. I'm not able to do the things I'm supposed to do. I'm losing my efficacy. I just can't be the person that I used to be. And so when all this stuff accumulates and accumulates and accumulates, we start to feel like we can't solve the problem. We start to lose hope. There's no resolution of this. It's just going to keep going on forever. That's when we're now officially in crisis. And guys, I'm here to tell you, I got this slide from the research, but I'm also here to say this is exactly what happened to me during the pandemic. Like, Allison said, I'm a farm transition guy. I deal with estate planning. During the pandemic, I dealt with nothing but death all day, every day. I dealt with death among my friends. I dealt with death among my family members. And when I wasn't doing that, all the questions I were getting was about how to deal with death in these other people's families. And it got to be really hard. I felt like I could never get ahead. And as a result of that, I wasn't doing my job as a dad and as a husband. I wasn't sure if I couldn't do my professional job, if I couldn't do my family job, what good was I to anybody? And I just kept going through this cycle that you see over here on the side of your screen. The increased stress in my life led to increased grief. And by the way, especially for Allison and Karen, this is going to come as a shock to them. I'm an introvert. I'm a very extroverted introvert, but I'm an introvert. And when I get stressed out, I kind of retreat inside myself. And I was beyond stressed out. So I really kind of imploded, right? I just really withdrew back into myself. I didn't have any joy in any of the things that used to give me joy. I basically just hung out in a dark basement and didn't want to have any connection with anybody, which led to isolation, which increased my stress. And it went over and over and over and over and over. And so that's how I got to my state of clinical depression and as a result of the pandemic, which leads us then to burnout, right? I was burned out. So how does burnout work, right? It's exactly what we talked about. Burnout is simply the result of the stress overload. And it can start out as being, just something that makes us feel down or a little bit more, out of sorts. But the longer that we go through that burnout without getting help, the deeper and deeper that injury becomes. So it's kind of a state of exhaustion that kind of just raises itself into being a point of real illness, because we keep feeling like we're stuck in the same spot, moving around in that cycle that we talked about in the previous slide, because we keep being exposed to things that activate our emotions. We're in a constant state of anxiety and stress there. That leads us to feel like we're less effective at doing the things we need to do, which further deepens everything. So in agriculture, man, have you been exposed to something that just doesn't let up? Like, I don't know, maybe a drought. Lots of us have been going through that for the past couple of years, and you just don't see a way out of it, no matter how smart of an operator you are, no matter how conscious you are about your conservation efforts, it doesn't make it rain. And you don't even know what's going to make it rain. You think it's never going to rain again. And that just leads to stressors in your work life, your financial life, your family life, and it just kind of goes on and on. But maybe you're the caregiver in your home. And I think this resonates, very carefully with what Karen was talking about, because she was the caregiver to an only child. She was the caregiver to a husband that was dealing with a chronic and acute illness. Who was taking care of Karen, right? Who cares for the caregivers? And especially in our rural communities, we are so blessed to have so many people who care so deeply and so sacrificially for the people around them. But the problem with that is, who takes care of them, right? Who's going to give them reciprocity for the care that they're giving? And after a while, you're trying to pour out of an empty cup, and you need someone to pour into you. And you feel like, if I can't take care of everybody, well, then what good am I? And that's where you start depersonalizing yourself. So we all kind of see how these cycles work. So let's start talking about how to break these cycles, either with ourselves or with the people around us. And that means talking about self-care. Now, whenever I talk about self-care to rural audiences, I get all sorts of weird, mean, nasty looks and harumphs from the audience, okay? Self-care sounds selfish to people for whatever reason. Okay, I'm willing to embrace that. So we're going to stop talking about it as self-care. We're going to start talking about it as maintenance, okay? I have a question for you. If you do not regularly maintain your tractor or your combine, you don't grease the zerks, you don't change the fluid, you don't change the hydraulic fluids, you don't check tire pressures, you don't check bearings, you ignore all of the warning lights in your cab, you think everything is going to be fine, and you just keep operating that piece of equipment anyway, what's going to happen? It's going to look a lot like this, okay? If you don't maintain your stuff, one of two things is going to happen. Either its performance is going to slowly degrade over time and it's going to become worthless, or it's going to blow up on you. But those are your two options, right? You cannot ignore maintenance forever. You are the most important resource your farm has. Its most important resource, hands down. If you don't take care of you, if you ignore all the warning lights, if you don't do regular maintenance stuff, your performance is either going to slowly degrade over time or you're going to blow up. So taking care of you is taking care of the person that takes care of everyone else in your operation. And if you don't take care of you, frankly, that's irresponsible. And I'm saying this as I look at a mirror basically behind my monitor because I'm saying the same thing to me. I've had to recognize that for me to take care of my wife and kid, I have to take care of me. And that's tough because I suffer from self-esteem issues. I don't think I'm that great, but I kind of need to acknowledge like, hey, you do have some importance to these people, so maybe you should take care of yourself. So with that, what I want to do now is talk about some of the most common mental health issues out there, how you can spot the signs of those issues in the people around you, and if you're going through it, how can you help you? So let's start off with depression. And again, this is what I've gone through and am going through. I'm doing a lot better now, but I've gone through this and found out that for at least 3 generations back, my family has gone through this as well. So what are some of the signs of depression? Seeming depressed, right? This is the wacky thing, right? A survey showed that 70% of Americans can correctly diagnose depressive symptoms in others, and then they have no clue how to respond to it. Like, oh yeah, I can tell if that guy's depressed. Great. How should you help? So, right? We kind of know depression when we see it in others. It's very difficult to notice in ourselves. We'll talk about that here in just a second. But if you notice someone's had a change in their sleeping or eating habits, they're sleeping a lot more, or maybe they're sleeping a lot less, right? That might be a sign of an anxiety issue. We'll talk about that here in just a second, but sleeping more might just show that that person is so burned out, they just do not have the energy to kind of keep going. It was like Karen said, some days it was just hard to get out of bed, and that's exactly what I experienced as well. Changes in eating habits. And by the way, this can go either direction. Some people with depression almost stop eating at all. And some people, on the other hand, are trying to compensate with emotional eating and start to eat a lot more, but you can also see that manifested as significant changes in weight as well. Complete loss of joy in their favorite activities. And again, that's something that I experienced. All the stuff that I really like to do, I just didn't care about it anymore. It just didn't do anything for me. It didn't move my happiness needle. So if you see someone that used to love hunting and fishing or going to sporting events, whatever their hobbies were, if they just kind of let those go away, that's kind of a sign there. If you see someone pulling away, and I want to spend a little bit of time on this for just a second, because this is tough in rural communities. We see each other so infrequently. We might see each other at church on Sunday. We might see each other at the high school basketball game on Friday night. But there are kind of relatively few opportunities. And at those opportunities, you're trying to interact with everybody, right? The reason I'm saying it this way is that it's easy to notice the squeaky wheel, right? If a person's talking about their problems, or if they're engaging in behavior that's more attention getting, they're having outbursts, or maybe they're just doing something that kind of draws your attention to them, that's easy to spot. The thing about depression is that when you become more socially isolated, you get what and this is actually a term in the counseling field, depression compression. It's that implosion. You just don't go to stuff. You don't make phone calls. You don't reach out. And it can be hard to notice somebody who's not there. So one thing I would tell you, I'm not trying to tell you to keep tabs on your friends, but I'm kind of telling you to keep tabs on your friends. Look around at church, at the basketball game, at whatever, and say, all right, who's not here? And just give them a call, like, hey, Tom, I didn't see you at the basketball game. I missed you. What's going on? And just kind of, try to catch up with them. But look for the people that aren't there, or for the people that have kind of gone mysteriously silent. And then, of course, suicidality, which is something we'll talk about in more detail a little bit later on. We're going to come back to that. So what are some tools we can use to help someone that's dealing with depression? It's simply showing non-judgmental compassion and empathy, right? It's not going up to the person and being like, hey, man, you seem like a real bummer, like cheer up. Telling someone to cheer up is not going to work. And if you read the Proverbs, for example, it's terrible to sing songs to someone with a sad heart. So don't try to cheer them up. Just say, hey, Shannon, man, you seem like you're not quite yourself. Is everything okay? Do you want to talk to me about it? I'm here for you. And sometimes that's really all it takes, is to know that there is somebody else out there that cares enough to reach out to you. And as you're listening, just empathize. Don't try to fix it. Don't judge. Just say, hey, I could see where if I was in your position, that would be really tough. We would all respond to stress differently. And man, is it easy to Monday morning quarterback like, well, if I was in your situation, this wouldn't be a problem because I'm super resilient. No, man, they got where they are. Okay. That's their emotional journey. So come alongside them in that journey and it's like, hey, yeah, man, if that happened to me, I'd probably be pretty upset too. Like, what can I do to help you move forward with this? On this point, I want to be really careful about this. Our faith communities can be a major asset when we're trying to help someone deal with depression. And we can also shove people down violently with this as well. Because I can't tell you how many times I've heard, well, if you just had a stronger faith, if you just, gave this to Jesus, if you just read your Bible more, you wouldn't be going through this. Guys, I can show you so many Bible characters that went through either depression or anxiety. You just never read it that way before. For some people, it's not a matter of faith. It's a matter of neurotransmitter imbalances, or it's a matter of sustained chronic trauma. It's not a faith issue. It's not that they've lost their faith. It's not that they haven't been praying about it fervently, right? So use the faith that says when someone's down, we need to be empathetic, sympathetic, and compassionate. And we're going to help lift them up gently and kindly, not by saying like, oh gosh, you should be a better Christian about that. Okay. All right. Try to gently encourage them to connect. Try to nudge them out a little bit if you can and say, hey, if you don't want to go out, that's okay. Can I hang out with you for a little bit? Can I just be here with you? And if I just need to be here and be quiet, just so you know that there's another person around, I'll do that. But kind of try to, again, just kind of help them connect, even if it's just with you, and move them slowly to that. All right. If the person is suicidal, and again, we're going to talk about this later on, do not let them stay alone, right? You are basically mandatorily kicking them out of isolation because you can't leave them by themselves. But again, we'll talk about that later on. If you need to help yourself, right? Depression is a funny illness in that it's an illness that tries to convince you, A, it's not there, and also B, that you don't need help for it. I mean, cancer doesn't do that. Having a broken arm doesn't do that. Heart disease, migraines, none of those illnesses actively try to convince you that they're not there. And oh, by the way, you don't need help with them anyway, right? So you do have to occasionally check in on yourself. Do you not feel like yourself? If you notice that you don't get joy from the old things, if you notice that your relationships seem to be shifting on you a little bit, daily, check in with yourself and just ask, how do I feel? I mean, all else fails, give yourself a rating from 1 to 10, but like, all right, I'm going to see how I'm doing here. And one thing that I kind of think helps with that is journaling, but that's also really productive in that gives you a way to share your feelings. Even if you're sharing your feelings just with a computer or with a notebook, it lets you get your feelings out and examine them. Because sometimes that process can be hugely valuable to help you kind of figure out, well, what's been the source of this? And can I do something about the source, or do I just need to get my feelings out there? My first visit with my therapist, I thought, well, I should probably give her a rundown of what I want to talk about here. So I sat down at my computer. 8 single-spaced pages later, I was done. And I thought, oh, maybe I should have done this sooner, because apparently there's a lot of stuff that I want to deal with there. Don't be afraid to get help. Like I said, this is maintenance. This is you taking care of a person that is important to your operation. So take care of you. And I get, if there was a counselor in town, I get that you might not want to go see the counselor because you'll know, oh my gosh, if I drive down to the counselor's office, they're going to see Farrell's pickup out there. They're going to think something's wrong with Farrell. Spoiler alert, there's something wrong with everybody. Everyone needs some help. They just don't realize it, okay? But if you're not comfortable doing that, go talk to your primary care physician. No one's going to think twice about you going to go see your doctor, but it's become common practice for lots of our physicians to have a inventory that they take you through to see if you have any depressive or anxiety-based symptoms. And they can also talk to you about some medicinal uses as well. I was very resistant to taking any kind of pharmaceutical to help me with my depression. I don't know why. It was a pride thing, I suppose. But when I talked to my parents and I found out that I have a multi-generational history of depression in my family, that changed my perspective a lot because I started to realize, like, oh, there might be some neurotransmitter cards that are stacked against me. And I talked to my physician about it, and it made a world of difference. It fixed a lot of things that I wouldn't have been able to fix just through therapy alone. So don't be afraid to talk to your physician about that. It can be incredibly valuable for you. Okay, let's look at anxiety for a minute now. And anxiety and depression are often coupled together. They can obviously live, independently of the other, but they're also often coupled. Being constantly anxious about issues in your life can lead to depression. And by the way, if you need examples of this, I've got some movie characters over here on the right side of your screen that have all had anxiety issues on screen. But anxiety is kind of what you think it is, right? Anxiety is being persistently worried about things in general, or you may have specific things that cause what you would probably say is a disproportionate amount of anxiety. Like when this one thing pops up, the average person wouldn't think about it, but it really bugs me. And we might think of that in terms of phobias, right? You might be really scared of thunderstorms because of a fire that happened as a result of a lightning strike. You might have concerns about driving because of an accident, but it's more than just phobias. And sometimes it's completely unrelated. You might see physical manifestations of this. We think about the fear with anxiety, but shortness of breath, not being able to take a full, deep, slow breath in certain situations, even when there's not an active physical threat there around. And you might know this intuitively, but PTSD and obsessive compulsive disorder, those are both anxiety disorders. PTSD being anxiety that's triggered by an event that reminds you of a traumatic event that you've had in your past. OCD, you feel tremendous concern about some particular thing. You're very concerned about illness if you don't wash your hands very repeatedly. You might have to do something like knock on a door or flip a light switch because you have a fear that if you don't do that, there's going to be a very serious outcome as a result of that. So if you've got someone in your life that may be experiencing a panic attack, right, this acute manifestation of this anxiety, well, then call 911 anytime you're in doubt, right? If you can't tell if this is a panic attack or a cardiac arrest issue, engage 911, especially important in our rural areas where 911 response can just take some time because we have volunteer responders. Go ahead and call 911, tell them about the symptoms, and engage those folks. Reassure the person. And I think the classic anti-example of this is a story I heard about a Little League game where a kid was having a really hard time at the plate and his dad was up against the fence yelling at him, relax, relax. And I'm here to tell you, that's not how you do it, okay? If you have someone that's quite honestly freaking out a little bit, you have to be calm and say, hey, I know that there's something that's stressing you out that you're really afraid of. I'm here with you. I'm not going to leave you. I'm going to do everything I can to keep you safe, and say that calm, reassuringly, but also with some authority in your voice so that they know that you actually mean it. And then model slow breathing for them. Don't have them breathe into a paper bag. The research shows that's actually a horrible idea and can actually make it worse, can make them hypoxic. So just say, hey, I'm going to breathe. You try your best to breathe with me. It won't be easy at first, but eventually you'll get there. So let's breathe slowly, right? Take them in slowly through the nose and then slowly out through the mouth. Ask them if this has happened to them before. And if it has, hey, was there anything that helped? Is there anything I can do to kind of help you, recenter and calm down? And one of those tactics is what's called the 5-4-3-2-1 method. And it's basically a means of bringing the person back to where they are. Because if you're having a panic attack, you may have actually kind of removed yourself from the current actual situation. You've put yourself into the panic situation. So 5-4-3-2-1 just means, hey, look around. Tell me 5 things you can see. Tell me 4 things you can hear. 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste, even if the taste is just your gum or, just the taste of the coffee that you drank 3 hours ago, right? But take them through their senses, and that has the effect of bringing them back to where they actually are. If you're struggling with this yourself, just kind of ask yourself, are you constantly worried or afraid? Okay, well, that's anxiety, definitionally, right? So if you're constantly in that state, say, okay, what can I do to kind of help myself pull out of this? Like, I need to hop out of this at least every once in a while just to kind of help myself regulate. Do you notice that there are things in your life that you sit there and go, why does this bug me so much? Or why is this thing, affecting me in this way? And I have here, be aware of lightning damage. When lightning strikes your house, it does really weird things. It might affect systems that are completely on opposite sides of your house. You're like, those things don't even share a circuit. How did that happen? Well, that's anxiety. Anxiety and constant worry about one thing may not manifest itself in exactly the way that you think it would. I didn't realize this, but I had an anxiety disorder in law school, and it had nothing to do with me being anxious in class. My anxiety about my performance in law school manifested itself as me getting claustrophobic in crowds. And those are things that just don't have anything to do with each other, but that's anxiety. It's weird. And again, using mindfulness or a sensory technique, an app like Calm or Headspace, anything that can kind of help you settle yourself and put yourself back into the moment. Doesn't mean you have to put yourself in the lotus position and hum ah or in, Gregorian chants on the hood of your tractor, right? But just some technique, even if something as simple as 5-4-3-2-1 can help you kind of find yourself again. Okay. And by the way, I mean this very literally. Having a happy place or a nice playlist of music that helps you calm down is huge. I have a chill out playlist on my iPhone, and I listen to it and I close my eyes and think about my favorite place on the planet, which is a mountaintop that I hike to in Canada every once in a while. And it calms things right down. My heart rate lowers, my breathing rate lowers, and things kind of come back into focus. Okay, very quickly, I just want to talk about psychosis. Psychosis is what most people think of when they hear mental health. When they talk about mental health, their mind automatically goes to the most extreme case of that, where someone really truly does have a disconnection from reality. And guys, there are so many shades of mental health issues before you get to psychosis. But if you do see someone who just seems like they have really truly lost the ability to correctly perceive what's going on in reality around them, or they're making things up, they think that people very close to them have done horrible things, and for a fact that they haven't. I'm not telling you to doubt the victim in certain cases, but I'm just saying, like, that person's been with me the entire time. They wouldn't have had a chance to do the thing that you're saying. Then you probably need to engage some emergency responders and keep that person safe, but also keep yourself safe as well. And much as with an anxiety attack, you're trying to de-escalate things. Be calm, be quiet, don't do things to agitate them. And this being agriculture, don't try to slap them out of it. That's probably not going to help. If they have requests, as long as it's reasonable and safe, okay, do that. If they think that they need a glass of water, or if they think that they need to go to some place and it's safe and okay to do it, okay, let them have some sense of control, and that might help them kind of find themselves again. Trying to notice this in yourself, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult. It's really hard. The best thing I can say is, have you seen signs or evidence of behavior that you don't remember? Like if, things aren't where you thought they were in your house, if you seem to have gaps in your memory, those might be issues of psychosis. They could be, high level trauma or stress issues as well. But in either case, it's a great opportunity for you to say, all right, there's something that's amiss. Let me go talk to somebody and see if we can get to the root of that. I'll also, kind of go briefly over substance use, and I apologize, my animations didn't pop up on here, but substance abuse disorders or addiction. And I added addiction on here because when we talk about substance abuse, we're almost always thinking, opioids, barbiturates, narcotics, stimulants, that kind of stuff. But you know what else is a substance abuse disorder? Food, addiction to things like pornography, gambling, any sort of activity that's kind of a maladaptive response is a sign that we need some help there. So if you notice that someone's behaving in a way that kind of makes you think, wow, there may be a chemical or some other issue at work here. And if you think that they might be having an overdose response, again, call 911 immediately, engage with someone, see if they have a medical alert bracelet to see if there's any medication they might have taken too much of that might be causing that. And in trying to spot this with yourself, I just want you to ask your question. Is there something that you're relying on to quote unquote take the edge off? If there's something that you're always doing to help you calm down, or is there something that you're always using to help you get up? Not saying that coffee is an addiction, although it might be, right? But if I'm constantly relying on coffee or, I don't know, meth to get myself up, is it because I'm suffering from depression and my baseline is down? Or if I'm using depressants to deal with things, is that because I have anxiety? So ask yourself, am I constantly relying on something external other than people, right? Am I relying on a substance or gambling or pornography or whatever? Am I constantly relying on that? That kind of tells me I've probably got an addiction there. But the other sign too, and this requires you to be kind of honest with yourself, is are you hiding your use of that substance or that activity? Because I do rely on it so much, or I wouldn't want my family to know that I'm doing that. That's a sign that you probably need something. Let's talk about dealing with disaster in ag real quick. And I know our time's running out on us. I want to make sure we get y'all out of here in a timely fashion. If someone's had a disaster, fire, flood, tornado, you name it, right? Job number one, meet physical safety needs. Get them to shelter, get them away from the danger, help them to feel safe, okay? Then sustain, help them meet their basic physical needs. And I put a star here because ag excels at this. If you've had a crisis in your life, here comes the casserole cavalry, right? And by the way, casseroles are great, but there are other foods that people like to eat as well. And yeah, that's fantastic, right? Bring them food if they need that. But here's the thing. At some point, where do they keep it? Sometimes you're just overrun with food. So if you're going to bring the food, maybe you also bring a cooler or bring paper plates and disposable things so the folks don't have to use dishes. There may be needs that they have beyond food. Do they need a place for family to stay? Do they themselves need a place to stay? But look for all of those physical needs and ask them like, hey, you might have more meatloaf than you can shake a stick at. What other needs do you have that we can help you with? Then the next stage is comfort, right? Monitor them for the long haul. Be on the lookout for anxiety. For example, if that wildfire was caused by a lightning strike, or if there was a tornado that blew away the home, that person might be super antsy when another thunderstorm comes along. So if you see that there's a forecast for severe weather, go hang out with the person. Invite them to come over to your house. At our house, we have a nice full furnished basement. And we're like, hey, if you're worried about storms, come hang out at our place. Have a basement party. Our theater room is down there. Watch movies. Just don't even worry about the storms. You'll be in a safe place already. Connect. Make sure that you check in with that person regularly. And I think the classic example of this is the funeral, right? Everyone is super supportive the week leading up to the funeral. And then after the funeral is over, everyone goes away. And guys, I'm here to tell you, that's the hard part, is the day after the funeral, because now you have to confront everything without all the busyness. So stay connected with that person for the long haul. Let them know about the support resources that are out there. Like, hey, if this is heavy and you want to talk to a counselor, I'll go with you. If you want me to drive you there, I'll do it. If you want me to stay in the waiting room, I'll do it. If you need me to walk you into the counselor's office, I'll do it. I'll be there as much or as little as you want me to, but I'm here to tell you that's okay. And again, I think this is why it is so important for us to share the stories of our struggles so that other people know it's okay to struggle and it's okay to get help. And then try to empower them, right? Help them make it back to whatever their new normal is, and let them know that you're there for the long haul. Like, hey, whatever you need, I'm here to support you in that, whatever that looks like. Okay. That's the key to that long-term success and response. Okay. Again, I know our time is short. I want to go through these issues, and I think I've got my slides a little bit out of order here. I'm sorry about that. If you are concerned that a person may be contemplating self-harm, ask them, hey, are you thinking about suicide? And people are so concerned that that is actually going to put the idea in their head, and all the research says absolute baloney. Research shows time and again that if a person is contemplating suicide and someone thinks to ask them, that usually has the effect of making them think, one, someone actually cares about me enough to ask. Two, it's a little bit jarring, right? They're like, whoa, I mean, I guess, yeah, I was thinking about that. I didn't really realize it until now. So ask them, right? Are you having suicidal thoughts? Do you have a plan for how you're going to do this? Do you have access to lethal means? And this is why, by the way, the ag industry has one of the highest suicide completion rates amongst any group, is because there are more ways for us to hurt ourselves on farms than there are anywhere else. So as you talk to that person, listen, right? Listen to their responses. And I don't care if the reason they were thinking about suicide was the fact that their pet turtle died or that their farm is going into bankruptcy. I don't care about the severity. Whatever it was, it got them there. And that's the issue. So listen empathetically, non-judgmentally. Look for our warning signs, and we'll talk about those here in just a second. But then if the person is going to do harm to themselves, or you think they will, you cannot leave them alone. This is just like performing CPR. Once you start performing CPR on a person, you cannot stop until you are physically exhausted or until emergency help arrives. It's the same thing here. That you encounter someone that's about to commit suicide, or you think might be thinking about it, you cannot leave them alone until you get help. And if you're talking to that person on the phone, you tell them, I'm going to be there. I'm going to stay on the phone with you until I'm actually physically next to you. And then have someone near you call or text emergency response for help, and remove all access to any lethal means that person might have. I know we need to wind things down. So I want to talk really quickly about just resilience generally, right? Just be aware of the things that we've talked about today, and recognize this is like any other injury, right? If I get a cut working on the farm and I put a Band-Aid and some Neosporin on it, it's probably no big deal. But if I keep ignoring it, it could get an infection. The infection can become gangrenous. The gangrene can lead to sepsis. And, before you know it, I'm in ICU. The whole key to all of this is for us to recognize when we've got mental health issues, to treat them early on and effectively, to get the help that we need before it gets too serious. But if we come along and we meet somebody that's already in a serious spot, then let's go out and engage them. For us to do that, we need to understand the stress overload process that we talked about earlier. We need to be aware of some of the signs that are out there for anxiety, for depression, for substance use, for any of those acute issues out there. We need to learn how to be empathetic and non-judgmental. And I know that sounds tough, but remember, it doesn't matter how the person got there. That's where they are. So we've got to help them where they're at. And it requires us all kind of doing something about it. So if you need some help in learning more about how to do something about it, beyond just having our 1-hour webinar here, we've got our Farm Stress website. It's just extension.okstate.edu/farmstress, with a bunch of modules on there about everything from suicide intervention to just how do you productively manage stress in your life? How can you cut off these issues before they get to be too big for you? Also, I will really strongly encourage you, if you have any kind of an opportunity, to do the mental health first aid training. It's an 8-hour training, but man, is it good. Same thing with QPR. It's a suicide intervention training. It's 3 hours long. We have so many of our volunteer firefighters and volunteer EMS folks out there in our rural communities that take care of us. It's now time for us to have volunteer mental health first responders. And taking these trainings is one of the most important first steps you can take to being a mental health first responder for your community. The last thing I want to leave you with today, before we get to our questions, is to let you know that you're doing everything you can. If you're struggling with depression, anxiety, substance abuse, because things have been tough on your farm, I get it. But this essay from one of my friends, I think, is fantastic. And in there, he had some fantastic lines. It's enough to pursue, excuse me, good goals because they're good and important. Free to the false god of efficacy, we can rightly tend the goods we're given to enjoy. If we never change the world, that's okay. Let's free ourselves of that idol and its path that leads to frustration, burnout, and despair. In other words, and I kind of view this from my faith lens. God calls us to be faithful. He doesn't call us to be successful. If you're doing everything you can, you're doing everything you can, and you're doing your best, and that's okay. It doesn't matter if you're struggling. There are people that can help you with that struggle. And I'm going to show you this sign that is next to the door. So as you're leaving my counselor's office, this is the last thing you see. It just says, let whatever you do today be enough. So we talk about being non-judgmental and empathetic to the people around us. That means you too. Show yourself self-compassion. Be kind to yourself. Take care of yourself, because you know what? You're awesome. I mean, you're here actively engaging with the things that we're talking about in this webinar series because you care about the people around you, and that's huge. So we appreciate you so much for doing that. And with that, I know I've gone a little bit over time. I apologize to our host for doing that. I swore I'd be more timely about that stuff, but I think you guys hit one of my hot button issues here. I know we've got some questions in Q&A. MCs, how would you like us to proceed there?
We actually, first of all, Dr. Ferrell, incredible. I know that this has touched so many people, and being a former educator, going over time just means that you're being thorough, and that's very, very important. So
I appreciate that glass half full outlook.
Yes, very impressed. And I will tell you, my husband and I have used firsthand those resources that Dr. Ferrell has online at okstate.edu and that /farm stress. So please use that. Dr. Ferrell, you have been incredible. It looks like we just have a couple statements. So I might just have you look at those later and then respond to them via email, maybe, if that's okay.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll tell everybody that's on what we've seen in the Q&A are just some folks saying, yeah, like we've seen this, we've seen people going through this. And so it's another way of letting you know you're not alone out there if you're going through this, or if you know someone who is, let them know that they're not alone. So for everyone that commented, we deeply appreciated that. I am actually copying down those comments, and I'll respond to those folks via email.
Awesome. Well, again, Dr. Ferrell, this is exactly what we wanted. You did this 100% exactly what we needed. So we're so thankful for you. Miss Karen, you're incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your story. That wraps up our Cultivating Healthy Minds session 3. Please come to state convention to wrap up our Cultivating Healthy Minds for Oklahoma Farm Bureau, and you all have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. See you later.
Thanks, everyone. We appreciate you.
Bye.